So, hello and welcome. Everybody should be able to hear me okay. What about you, Troy? Can you hear me okay? Any problems with sound? I picked that particular song to be singing tonight because if anyone were to uh, ask you to encapsulate Judaism, what would you tell them? Where would you send them for information? Both of those are really good answers, but there's a better choice. How about this one? The book of Devarim, the one that we're going to begin to study, because there is no other book that so encapsulates and dramatizes all the key elements of Judaism as both a faith and a way of life. Because what we have here is different than what we've seen in the previous four books of the Torah. The last four have been a narrative, pretty much. It was interrupted for a bit with the book of Leviticus, but then the narrative continued in the book of Numbers. Now, we don't have a narrative going on. We have something new happening. And when you stop to think about this particular text, what do you know about the people to whom Moses is speaking? These particular people, Moshe's audience, none of whom left Egypt, none of them stood at Sinai, none of them saw the miracles. Moshe is speaking to an entirely new generation. A generation that is expected to go into the land and take it from the Canaanites. Right, exactly. The only ones that had been through that entire journey with Moshe were Caleb and Joshua. And Joshua is going to take over the leadership of the people. Caleb is not. Moses will fade away and die in this chapter, and he will disappear from the book. But before that happens, and before he turns leadership over to Joshua, he's going to recap what's happened in all the other books. He's going to recap the teachings of the Torah. He's going to talk about the miracles that occurred. He's going to talk about the slavery from which the people were redeemed in Egypt. And so he's speaking to a whole new generation of people that did not see any of this that was going on. And this in turn begs an entirely new question. Actually, a couple of them. Let's look at this one first. I'm going to punch it in so you can see it. Don't have to try and hear it. This question: how do you render a story that happened to other people and make it your story? Make it as meaningful to you as the day it occurred. How do you tell the story of our people's relationship with God and move a new generation to willfully and passionately enter into the sacred covenant? Because this is basically what Moses is going to be doing in this. This is kind of like an overview of the entire book. And so this is what we're going to see happening. So how do you do this? If you're in Moses' position, how are you going to tell this story? What are you going to do? And the second question that I would like you to consider is this one. And now, these questions are religious challenges. These were not only religious challenges for Moses, these are religious challenges for us in our time as well. And in fact, these questions have been relevant to every generation. So the second question here is, how do you make the argument to a generation of Jews that the Jewish community and the Torah provide a rich and compelling framework to pursue ultimate questions of meaning? And since World War II, this has been a really major issue, just like it's been the Babylonian exile, and our people went to Babylon. How could we sit and sing a new song by the rivers of Babylon? How do we do that? Okay, let's see what you got here. Try and relate it to them. He shares about the journey that they had in the desert and relates it to their fathers that were from Egypt. Okay. And celebrations. Okay, now that's a good beginning, but I want you to think about something. If you were sitting, okay, you're sitting with your mom and dad, and they say, I have something important to tell you. And the next thing you know, they're sitting there and they're sharing how they got here. Oh, well, your grandfather and your grandmother met in New York. Your grandfather came from Germany. Your grandmother came from the U.S. Her parents came from Germany, so she was a first generation Jewish American. And your grandfather, he came and he married your grandmother, and they had a bunch of kids, and I'm one of them. And then your mom and I met, and we met like this, and we got married, and we had you. And these were our generations, and we have celebrations that we have as a family. We go camping, we do these activities, we have these specific holidays. How long before you would begin to tune out what your parents are saying, and your eyes would kind of begin to sort of glaze over and get that, that look that kids get? Would your answer here hold your interest? Or would it not be as relevant? After all, do you really think all these Jews out there in the wilderness really care about their parents? Oh yeah, we left Egypt. We've been wandering. We don't know anything about Egypt. It's a place in our past. Yeah. The old country. Our families came from there. We don't care one way or another. The only light we know is this one that's in the desert. So what do you think? You're on track as a good beginning. What else? Jadelle, welcome this evening. If you scroll up, can you see the couple questions that I posted? I posted 2 sets of questions that we're talking about here. We're in the book of Devarim, the first parsha of the book of Deuteronomy, where Moses is relating his speeches to the people. Do I need to repeat the questions? Okay, that's not it. Oh dear, now let's see. Okay, get myself back here. Okay, I did something here and removed my chat room. Okay, I don't know what I did. Anyway, so did you see? Maybe it's over here. I see a chat room over here now. Okay, so let's see. Let me post the first question again, Jadelle. Because I don't think that you're able to do it. So let me put it back up there for you. Sorry, I'm getting it out of my notes here. So there's the first question that we're looking at in this book. And let me post the second one. Here's the second one. And so Troy has suggested that we talk about that Moses relates to and what's already happened. And, Troy's on the right path here, but is just relating to the people, this new generation that's never been to Egypt, never witnessed the miracles, never crossed the Sea of Reeds, never seen the pillar of fire and the pillar of smoke by day and by night, never gone to Mount Sinai. How can Moses make this relevant and meaningful to the people? How do you do that? Is it the job of a leader to make this relevant? Or is it the job of someone else, perhaps an educator? Judaism is Jews are the only group of people that have teachers as leadership. Our leaders are meant to be teachers and leaders at the same time. Excuse me a minute, I have to go close the door. The dog came in, left open, and I don't want to hear that noise in the background. So excuse me just a moment. You can put it in. Okay, I have returned. So let me give you an answer here. Book of Devarim has a unique path for this covenant. It's the primary purpose of this book is to restate and to renew the covenant. Now, the Hebrew word for lomed, which is to study or teach, is spelled with the letters of, let me get this correct, push the right ones here. Okay, it wasn't that one. Let's try this one. Lamed. Oh, wrong letter. Sorry about that. This one I wanted. Mem, Lamed, Mem, and Dalet. Lamed, Mem, Dalet is the root that is to teach and to learn. The root is both meanings. First you teach, then first you learn, then you teach. This particular word is shown in the Torah text only in this book. And it is here 17 times in the 34 chapters of the text. Because what we want to do is we want to be teaching how, we teach how Judaism provides a compelling framework. We make it relevant. We got to bring it into the present and into our lives. Like the question of Mount Sinai that we recite every year in the Passover Haggadah. It was just not our fathers and our ancestors that stood at Mount Sinai. It was also us. All generations, past, present, and future, of Jews. Right. Teaching and intensive studying. They're the same root. So they are the same, studying and teaching. Because that's what we do as Jews. We study, we teach. For us, Torah study is a way of worship. And we know that all Jews, past, present, future, and yet to come, stood at Mount Sinai. And we know that when we recite the Passover Haggadah, it's as if we ourselves are being redeemed from Egypt. It's not a story that is just for our ancestors. It's a story that impacts us, and we are to see ourselves as a current participant in this story. And that's one of the ways that we can make it relevant. When we look at the first question, how do you render the story that happened to other people? That's one of the best ways to make it. We make it our story. We imbue it with meaning for us. Yes, we're not in slavery to the Egyptians, but we can think about what is it we are enslaved to. How do we tell this story of our people's relationship? We use, as you suggested, the holiday of Pesach, for instance. We talk about what our people's relationship is with God. We study Torah every week. Traditional Torah reading times are Mondays, Thursdays, and Shabbat morning. Those were all market days in the past world. And so, because people were in town on market days, that's the days we study Torah. How do we make the argument to a generation of new Jews that the Jewish community and Torah provide a rich and compelling framework? We have to find our way into it. Like Ben Bog said, we take the fig and we look the tree over because every branch we turn in the fig tree is like Torah. We turn it and we turn it and turn it again because we find new and compelling framework. We make the text relevant to our lives and we make the text relevant to the story of our students' lives. The experience of learning and teaching is central to this book and to this Parsha. And we will get a little further down the road and see some of the things that God has told Moses to tell to us in this recapping, but God's teaching the Israelites, Moses is teaching the nation. The people are teaching them. Our leadership is teaching us. Correct. You're right. Teaching is the intensive conjugation form of the root lamot. So there is no difference between teaching and learning because we teach ourselves. We can pick up the book, and once we know how to read, we can take the book, we can examine the book, and we can teach it to ourselves. We study it and we learn it. We can memorize it by reciting it over and over and over again. We can share it with our families. We can share it with children. And so our book is about teaching and it's about learning. And it's about that intense process that we have. If we're doing one-on-one teaching and learning, it's Havruta. So we take the text and we parse it out and we discuss it back and forth and back and forth. And it's very, very important. So now that we've kind of gotten an overview here and we understand how teaching and learning come together, let's look at the beginning of the Parsha. What do we have at the very beginning of the Parsha? We have Ela Hadaverim Asher Devar Moshe El Kol Yisrael. And these Hadavarim are the words Asher Devar Moshe, which said Moses or spoke to all of Israel. And so they were on the other side of the Jordan. They've been through the wilderness in the Arabah near Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazeroth, and Dizavab. It's 11 days from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by the Mount Seir road. This was in the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, that Moses addressed the Israelites in accordance with the instructions that God had given him for them. And that particular word, let's see, where did I have that? I should have marked that little verse right there. Verse 5. On the teaching on the other side of the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to expound this teaching. And we are told what this teaching is. Ba'ashtarot, in the Ashtarot. Okay, last sentence. Excuse me there. Ba'avar, on the other side of Ha-Yirdan of the Jordan, Ba'eretz Moab, in the land of Moab, Ho'il undertook Moshe Ba'ar to expound Et HaTorah Hazot Lamor. Et HaTorah Hazot. He took for this teaching these instructions, HaTorah. That by itself tells us that this book is a book of HaTorah, of teachings. And Torah, which is, let's see, could I make sure I can find the correct letters on my keyboard? Excuse me here. Let me switch back to English. Yep, that didn't do it. Try one more time to get back to English. can't get my book to go back. Okay, so let's see. Torah. Make sure you spell it correctly. Torah Hazot, this Torah. Okay. So there we have it. Any comments on the idea of Torah being instructions, teaching? We understand Torah has many forms. It's not only the 5 books of Moses, it is the entire Tanakh, it is the entire realm of Jewish teaching. Talmud, Torah. Correct. I should have translated that. Thank you. Thank you, Jadel. And Torah Hazot refers to the entire spectrum of Jewish learning. So God is giving Moses the instructions and address these Israelites in accordance with the instructions that God had given them for him. And then we got the line that says, after he had defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites, who dwelt in Heshbon, and Og, king of Bashan, who dwelt at Ashtaroth and Edrei, land of Moab, Moses took to expound this teaching. Why do we have this in here? Why is this so specific? You know, they're in the wilderness. We know that it's 11 days from Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by the Mount Seir route. We know that this occurred in the 40th year on the first day of the 11th month that Moses addressed the Israelites. And the other half of the sentence is after he defeated Sihon, king of the Amorites, etc., etc. Then he undertook to expound the teaching. So how does this fit into here? This is kind of like it's just dumped in. What do you think? Comments? It's just dumped in there. It's part of the story. It doesn't seem to fit because these are the words that we'll be addressing. So why are we repeating this? What has this got to do with the story at large? What do you think? Any comments? Any thoughts? We know that this book is our model for teaching, but how does this fit in here? Why do we have this sentence right in here? And why is it that we mention Kadesh Barnea? Why are we mentioning these places now, and what do they have to do? It's the text I have talks about that these geographical references are really hard to identify. We know that Suf means reed, but chances are there's no reeds in Moab, which is where verse 5 on the other side of the Jordan in the land of Moab. Okay. Troy says that Moses is sharing what God has done for them in the past, and that God will be with them and help them in the future as they cross the river. So it's not that so much the text is saying that, but that's what the text seems to be implying, that God has been with us in the past, and because God has been with us in the past, we can rest assured that God will be with us in the future. Does that kind of seem right? So we'll go with that. And so, can we see yet that there's going to be a theme to this first speech? We're going to talk about the theme of this first speech of Moses is going to be what has happened in the 40 years that the people have been out in the wilderness. And it's interesting that they mention that it is only 11 days from Mount Horeb to Kadesh Barnea by the Mount Seir route. So how come it took them 40 years? Why were they wandering for 40 years? Because of the single episode with the spies. Because it was determined that God realized at that point that these people who had left Egypt were not ready to be free men. They were kind of like a transitional generation, and we see that when slavery ended here in the South. I'm in the South, but here in the United States, with the I believe it's the 13th Amendment prohibited slavery. This first generation of slaves to come out of that really weren't able to care for themselves. They didn't trust. They didn't know how to be a free people. It's only generations that came after them that were born into freedom, understood what it meant to be free and how to be free, and the responsibilities that freedom entailed. And so we're seeing that same process with this first generation. They just aren't able to do it. Now, here's another question. We are told that Moses addressed his words to all Israel. So how is it, my commentary asks, that all Israel could actually hear what Moses was saying? He didn't have a loudspeaker. He didn't come across the radio. He wasn't on the stage with mic in hand. He didn't have the kind of equipment that we could set up in Washington, D.C. at one end of the reflecting pool, and people at the other end of the reflecting pool can hear. So how is it that all these people were able to hear what it was that Moses was saying? Any comments? Any ideas? I'll give you a second to think about it before I share the answer that's in my commentary. I'll give you a minute to catch up here because we have that delay time going on here. We'll wait and see. What do you think about that? Okay. The traditional view holds that a miracle made it possible for Moses' voice to carry to all the people. Just the same way that Judah's voice carried through all the people in Egypt when he spoke on behalf of his younger brother Benjamin. Another commentator, however, says the phrase all Israel occurs frequently in Deuteronomy. And when it occurs, it's referring to the group of Joshua, the elders, and the priests, all the notables who bore responsibility for the people. Instead of Klal Yisrael, all the people, some commentators say that Moses spoke only to Joshua, the leaders, the notables, and that they in turn would pass this information on. Some commentators believe that a miracle occurred, that everyone was able to hear Moshe's words. What do you think of the two choices? Of course, we have no real way to know for sure, so we're kind of in the dark on that one. But we can check the Midrashim and see what they have, but I don't have them here at my mother's with me tonight. So I can't check those to see what answer we would find for that question. And another comment that I'd like to share is on the very first word that opens this parsha, the word Elah, these. If you add up the values of each letter, the Aleph, the Lamed, and the Hey, the total is 36, because Aleph is 1, Lamed is 30, Hey is 5. And our tradition in the Talmud, the rabbi says that the world is sustained by the 36 tzaddikim, the 36 righteous men sustain the world. Just as the world is sustained by these words of the Torah. And so they found a commonality between the 36 gematria for Elah and the 36 righteous tzaddikim. Any comments? And here is a sweet comment for you, just for fun. If we change, let me see. Oh, if we change the now she pronounced O-U-N-C Devarim to Devarim. Devarim being bees, we can then draw a comparison and draw the analogy, I guess, that just as a bee's honey is sweet, so are the words of Torah, flavor. And that comes from the Midrash, and so I wanted to share that with you because these all have to do with the idea of learning. In fact, in many religious schools, when a child receives a brand new book, the teacher will put like a drop of honey on the cover for the child to lick off because it teaches the child specifically this analogy that just like honey is sweet, so is the study of Torah. And my kids love the first day of school because they like to lick the honey off the new textbooks. And then we move from here into verse 6. And Moses begins his actual speech. So the 5 verses we've had up to this point have just been the preparation, laying the foundation, giving us a time frame, 40th year, 11th day. Now it's like, the setting is there. Moses is beginning to speak. And the words that he says is, the Lord our God spoke to us at Horeb, which is another name for Sinai, saying that you have stayed long enough at this mountain. Make your way to the hill country of the Amorites, to their neighbors in the Arabah, the hill country, the Shephelah, the Negev, the seacoast, the land of the Canaanites, and the Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates. And see, I am placing this land at your disposal. Go and take possession of this land that the Lord swore to your fathers, Abraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov, to give to them and to their offspring after them. So we're getting that it's kind of being set. It's a short overview that this is why we're here. This is the how. This is the why. This is how God has brought you. This is why you have been brought here. And it's very interesting that the next verse, therefore I said to you, Ka'asher divar lechem echa asher levadai tarchachem. You hear that word echa? It means how. If you look on Tuesday, August 5th at 8 o'clock p.m., we are going to do the book of Lamentations. The book in Hebrew is called Echa, how. What kind of name is that for a book? In English, we call it Lamentations because they're laments, but why in Hebrew would we call it Echa? There is a connection between that Echa and this Echa, how. The one in Lamentations is, how do we survive tragedy? This one is, how can I bear the burden of you by myself? How do I do this? What do I need to do in order to do this? And the God, our God, has multiplied you. You are now 1,000-fold. You are numerous as the stars in the sky. May the Lord, the God of your fathers, increase your numbers 1,000-fold. May God bless you as he promised you. Right, it means how. That's correct. Echa is the first word in the text that becomes translated as Lamentations. But it's a very unusual word to begin a text with. So it kind of gives you a clue to what's going to be in that particular text of Echa that we will chant on Tuesday the 5th, sitting on the floor with a little bit of shadow because it's done after Ma'ariv in the evening. So we'll do a short Ma'ariv followed by Echa. So why is it that Moses said he couldn't bear the burden of the people by himself? Why? He was chosen for this job. He accepted this job. So why couldn't he look at it? Why couldn't he bear this burden? What was going on for him? And that's when he mentions that he selected leaders. He did what his father-in-law Yitro suggested to him. He selected leaders and leaders underneath them. No, but it's interesting, you would think that there would be a more important word to have used. Yeah. For instance, I don't know it offhand, but the Hebrew word for lament Let me pull it up real quick. Make sure I'm at the right end of the dictionary here. Let's look up what lament would be in Hebrew. Lament, to lament over, would be lekon. I'm sorry. Not enough light to see that vowel there. Lekonan. Lekonan, to lament over. Bechi, keynote. Kina, to lament for. So we could have named that text keynote, because keynote would be a verb, would be the noun that would name lament. And we refer to the 5 laments in there as keynote. Right. To many people to lead, he had to judge their conflicts, and he had to be the president, so to speak. Yes, somebody had to be the ultimate presider, and he was wearing too many hats. He couldn't do it by himself. And that's what he's reminding. He's saying that to this new group of people. I cannot bear the burden of you by myself. So he got help. And now look at you. And so I took your tribal leaders, and we did chiefs, and we did all these people. And then I charged your magistrates as follows: that fear no man, judgment is God's. Devarim, these are the items that you should pay attention to and remember. To take your wordplay, even as the bees remember where the source of sweetness is for them, oh, so they can return over and over. Right. Devarim can mean things, items, and words. So these are things to pay attention for. These are words. These are items. All of them have the same root, devar. And midabar, these and bees and these are kind of interchangeable in a lot of words. So you hear a lot of say like shivat, shebat, depending whether it's the bee. So debar is a place. Midabar, from the wilderness. So debar could be wilderness. And wilderness is where these people spend a lot of time with the devarim, things, words. And so we can understand this text on multiple levels because of the language itself. Hebrew, as we remember, is a language of consonants. The vowels that we have are actually little markers in the text that tell us how the word was pronounced. And they date from the Masoretes, and they date from the medieval period. And we didn't write the vowels before then in the text. So you kind of had to have the teacher to explain it, the teacher to discuss it, and in Hebruta, back and forth, you would share the teachings and we would teach each other. And the vowel markers from the Masoretes help us to that point today, so that we can understand, are we talking about the sweetness of bees? Are we talking about the sweetness of words? Are we talking about items? And a lot of this is determined by context of the sentence. So this is one of the reasons that Jews tend to be very learned people, because we spend our time learning how to parse out and analyze texts in other languages so we can understand what it is that we're looking at and be able to take it into ourselves. I once taught the verse in Deuteronomy, and I can't cite the verse offhand, that when you build a new house, do not forget to put a fence a fence around the roof. And the students that I was working with interpreted that in the modern context of safety, because most people lived on their roofs in that period. They slept on their roofs, they sat up there because it was hot, and to put a fence around the roof meant to keep people safe. So if you bring that forward into the future, well, we don't have flat roofs, most of us, so we don't live on the roof. So how could we then reinterpret that so we understand the meaning and the context and how we can use that text? Well, it's about public safety and safety in our home and liability. We don't want somebody visiting us to be hurt, to fall, to get injured. So we make sure our homes are safe, and we feel that we are obligated to have our home safe because we are taught that when we build a new home, don't forget to put the fence around the roof. So we have an obligation for public safety. So we interpret the text and we bring it forward to make it relevant to us and to make it so we can understand it. Then we get into immediately the situation that Moses talks about next is the one of the spies, and says, oh no, and repeats that and gives the brief overview of how the spies went in. They found out the information. Only Caleb and Joshua gave a good report. All the other spies gave a poor report. The people panicked. They were worried. Oh no, we can't do this. And even though Moses said, don't be afraid, don't be afraid, don't fear those, because the Lord your God is going before you and will fight for you as he did in Egypt. And yet the people still panicked. And then in the wilderness, where you saw how the Lord your God carried you as a man carries his son, and the way that you traveled until you came for that. And still you had no faith. So that then begs the question that if you yourself have no faith in God, how do you teach your children to have faith? Because we can see that right now with our Holocaust generation. They were so traumatized by the Holocaust and by the Second War that when it came to Judaism, people that came to the U.S. really didn't have a Judaism to pass down to their children because they couldn't pass down what they didn't have anymore. So they kind of did, the big shul and the suburban world, and kids going to Hebrew school, and parents would drop them off and then leave. Then they got into what they nicknamed the bar pot mitzvah mill, and then we got into this pattern as a people. And by the 60s, the joke became that if you wanted a good Jewish wife, go down to the ashram at the corner, because all the nice Jewish girls were down there with the Buddhists hanging out, because they were looking for something more spiritual, more meaningful, and deeper than what they had, and they didn't know it was in our own tradition, because they were the children of a traumatized generation who didn't know how to teach faith to their kids. So that's a question that this parsha begs as well, is how do the slaves teach faith to their children? And we've got about 5 minutes left, so I have to give my donation spiel that put another nickel in, put that in that pushka tin, donate, donate, donate. As you know, OneShul runs on donations and grants. And so if you have found this teaching inspiring, or you have learned something and would like to make a donation, we would love to have one from you. And OneShul has a suggested donation of $5 per class. You can make more or less or none at all as your heart speaks to you. But we want to continue to run these programs. We want to continue to pay for the technology that runs the live streaming in the chat room. So if you can see your way through to make a donation, we here at OneShul would really appreciate it. So back to our question about faith. How would you teach faith to your children if you don't have any? What would you do about that? It's a pretty profound question. Any comments? Or I can leave you with that question for next week, since we're down to our last 4 minutes, and say, do you have any questions or comments on what we've already covered for this week? That's the dog you see in the background there. That's our border collie. She's here visiting my mother as well. And so next week, we are going to move into the next parsha, which is Deut Chanah. Deut Chanah. And that will be next week, and that will be starting with chapter 23. Deuteronomy 3, chapter 23. So do you have any comments or questions? Then I will end with the song Oseh Shalom, that we pray for peace for those in Israel these days with the war that is happening with Hamas in Gaza. And we say, Oseh Shalom Bimromav, Hu Yaseh Shalom Aleinu, V'yal Kol Yisrael, V'imru, Amen. Yaseh Shalom, Yaseh Shalom, Shalom Aleinu, V'yal Kol Yisrael, Oseh Shalom, Oseh Shalom, so Shalom Aleinu, V'yal Kol Yisrael. May the one who makes peace in the high heavens make peace for all of us here on earth, and especially make peace for the people in Israel and the people in Gaza. And we say, V'imru, Amen. So I will see you. We will not have a Torah study next week. Oh, those are in the Midrash. Those stories would be in the Midrash, Yadel, because they were trying to figure out what happened to women, and they wanted to give context. They wanted to say Yocheved and Sarah. You know, they are such amazing women. They merit living long enough to go into the promised land. And no, women did not really count per se in the old generation. It was a man's world, but we have many examples of strong women in the text that show us, yeah, there is room for women. We have Jochebed, we have the midwives, we have Miriam, we have Sarah, we have all the matriarchs. We have the daughters of Zelophehad from last week, and the week before actually, were the daughters of Zelophehad and how they fought women's rights and they demanded their inheritance from their father, even though they had no brothers. So women sort of counted in a way and sort of not. We had women leaders, but the text was written down, of course, by men. And not all women got into the text. Only the ones the men chose to add into the text. Does that answer your question? Rabbis are known for creating midrashim, lots of them, to fill in gaps as to, because, the Torah doesn't tell us everything. It is partly a written tradition, but it's also partly an oral tradition. And in that oral tradition, that's again a place where we need a teacher, the process of lamed, teaching, studying, learning all together, because it was never meant to be strictly a written tradition. It was meant to be handed down and taught to each other. Right, they had to marry within their tribe to keep the wealth in the tribe, but they got the inheritance. God listened and said it was the right thing for them to have it, but they had it within a boundary because the wealth would have stayed in the tribe. If their father had lived, he would have stayed in the tribe, and so the wealth would. So that makes sense that they would say keep it in the tribe because of this, because they were very particular when they handed land out to the tribes as to who was getting what and how much each tribe was getting. So some women are important in the text. Some women do not get any names. But anytime women are named in the text, it's because they are important to that specific story. Men are almost always named. I can't, off the top of my head, think of any instances in which men are not named. I'd have to go back and research that a little bit. But women are not always named. Sometimes they're just unknown. Is that helpful? Right. Who knows what accounts of women were lost? I've had rabbis tell me that the women's stories are in the white fire between the black letters, and that we can look at the four sons in the Passover Haggadah. We have the story of the four sons, not the four children, not the four daughters. We have the story of the four sons. Oh, you're welcome. I had some of my bar mitzvah students write a midrash for Passover one year on the four daughters. And then they shared them at the Seder. Instead of doing the four sons that year, we did the four daughters. And everybody enjoyed the stories. They enjoyed their midrashim. So if there's no other questions, then I will say shalom, and we will see you next week on August 5th with Echa and a brief Ma'ariv. So Lila Tov, and have a good night. Yeah, the tune of Clementine. Oh, yeah, I know that well. So the father to his children, to his sons, yada, da, da. Yep, yep, yep. We know that one.